Chris was actually on top of the template, was exactly where he should have been, but we didn't know that until we got there. He could have been somewhere very close to the template. He could have been on the seabed.
Basically just flew around checking that he was all right. Checked his umbilical, make sure his umbilical wasn't trapped so it was free.
It was great to see Chris, although he was lying prone, and although we saw that his helmet was intact, there was a concern of the fact that he was not moving. He was twitching, he was maybe moving in the tide, but he wasn't actually responding. It was reflex. It wasn't anything conscious. And we spent many, many minutes watching him, unable to help him.
I've never been in a situation before where I've had a diver on the seabed with a severed umbilical. The vessel's 190 meters away, and he's there without any assistance for approximately 36 minutes.
Seeing him lying in the middle of the structure was very scary, and when we were sitting watching him, you could see the water line, the sickness feeling in your stomach, and seeing him lying there twitching away and not knowing if he was okay or not. It was probably one of the worst experiences of my life.
I thought Chris had been killed then.
There was some discussion between the ROV and the dive control about if it would be possible to get hold of Chris with the ROV and bring him to the bell as opposed to bringing the bell to him, because we didn't know if we could get control of the vessel at that time to get back.
At one stage we did get asked if we could pick him up and take him up to the bell. At that point I made the decision that it wasn't part of our procedures. We weren't trained in doing it, and there was pretty much nowhere that we could safely pick him up and take him to the bell. Also, with having 250 metres of tether spilled out on the seabed, not knowing where it is, we might not even made it back to the bell with him, you know, or dropped him, or anything could have happened.
The bell, you know, is our safe haven. If we drag it along the structure, then we have serious issues. At the same time, we had to rescue Chris. That's why I wanted the divers on top of the structure, because then at least we're not dragging the bell lower than the structures. Our cardinal rule in diving is to be 5 meters above the highest structure, so we can never touch it. We were going to break that rule by going as close as we could, kissing it if you want, when we got back there. But that would help Dave, because of lifting up a dead weight, if you want.
By the time we got back to the structure to rescue him, they were having to tell Dave not to jump off until the boat was stable in its new position back over the structure, back over the top of Chris.
I think Craig was aware that I was keen to leave the stage to get to Chris, and he told me that not to leave until he told me to.
To get everything ready is normal procedure. We do practice drills, and we actually do diver rescues and bring it back into the bell. So that is all standard form. But actually, you never actually think you're going to need it.
I think I treated recovering Chris the same way as I would have treated recovering an inanimate object from the seabed. I think that helped me to not think that I was recovering my colleague or a dead body or my friend. I recovered an object from the seabed.
Well, anyone's going to be emotional in this state. I wasn't emotional. I don't know why. I don't know where you get that strength or power or whatever. But I knew that Dave was keen to save Chris.
Earlier in the year, he'd come to my house with his wife for a party, and so I knew he was going to get married shortly. There was no way I was not going to let him get to that wedding. So, no, we were going to rescue him and make sure he was okay.
When I got to Chris, the first thing I did was to have a quick look at him. I don't think the water was covering his nose and mouth, but there was certainly a water line in the helmet. That he was not moving, he was not visibly breathing, he was lying on his front. The first thing that I did before I lifted him was to put my pneumo into his neck dam, giving him a gas supply. I then put him upright and tried to hold him upright as best I could to keep the gas in the hatch. I think I then clipped my rescue lanyard onto his harness and I started to come up on what remained of his umbilical. I knew that his umbilical had been trapped. I thought maybe it was still trapped, and I just made sure by coming up on the end of his umbilical. I asked Craig to get my umbilical pulled up as tight as I could, and I started climbing my umbilical, dragging Chris below and behind me. As the bell came down, his body was getting forced underneath the grating at the bottom of the bell, and I had a fair bit of trouble pulling him over that. Once I got the diver recovery hoist onto him and asked Duncan to come up, he slipped into the trunking fairly easily, and at that point, more than anything, I felt relief that my job was done, and I was handing over to Duncan.
Once he got him clipped onto the Mazdam, I can control Chris's weight, and all Dave then has to do is point him in the right direction and make sure he doesn't get caught coming up through the bell trunking. Once I had Chris securely on the Mazdam and his head inside the bell, Dave outside can't get in the bell, there's not enough room. Chris's body and his bailout's taking up the whole trunking, so he just has to wait then.
All I can see is a pair of legs dangling out the bottom of the bell. I know that at that point there's nothing that I can do. I wasn't holding on to any hope that he would have survived it. He was a dead weight, he looked like a dead body.
With him being unconscious, he had no reflex to hold his head up, and the diving helmet weighed 17 kilos.
Duncan took his hat off. We couldn't see in the camera.
His whole head, his ears, his lips, his nose was bright blue. I've seen cyanosis before, but only in lips and ears, and it was actually quite striking. Also, the reflex with his head lolling was still unbelievable. I had to keep his head up, which for Chris with no hair, he just had to put your hand on the top of his head like a billiard ball. I gave him 2 rescue breaths.
I said, how is he? He says, he's breathing.
He made a noise and started breathing straight immediately.
So we knew he was safe. For a moment, we knew he was safe. He was alive.
The fact that he gets into the bell and is still breathing is itself unbelievable. But the fight's not over there. It doesn't stop there. When you resuscitate people in hospital, you know that you can have these critical situations. You know you can restore someone to just be breathing and still lose. You can still lose because they have such horrible brain damage from starvation of oxygen. And so even at this point, they're not out of the woods.
Camera's back. ROV, can you just swing the bell, please?
I didn't believe that what Chris had gone through was survivable.
Chris started to regain consciousness. He seemed to recognise what I was asking him to do, and he did manage to climb up the ladder himself and sat down on his normal seat. The only thing is he did want to take off both Mazdam harnesses straight away, which is something that you would do after a dive. You take your gear off, and I had to convince him to stay sat in the seat, sit still. I was telling him he'd had an accident, he'd been out, he'd been rescued.
I was confused that Chris was okay. I almost wasn't expecting to see him when I got back into the bell. He looked half the man that went diving at the beginning of the day.
soon as we got that door seal on, we plugged Chris back into his hot water system.
You guys, I've still got the hot water running full pelt if you want to dose Chris Downing, if he's cold. Just on the outside of him, right? Nothing too major, just...
Kept him on the Mazdams just in case he did go unconscious again, and we're asking him questions now which he is actually able to answer. Every time that he actually spoke, answered a question, it was just over the moon.
I have a distinct memory of us being on our way back, and I can remember at that point reaching over and grabbing Duncan's hand, you know, and giving it a squeeze. So I'd obviously at that point I knew something had happened. What I can also remember is looking over and seeing Dave crumpled in the corner, exhausted, and not really understanding why.
Bridge, it's a bell on the surface, 19.
I think possibly when I got back into the bell, I was maybe a little bit cross with Chris in the way you would be as a father when your child wanders off and you can't find them. You're relieved to see them, but also you're angry with them for having put you through the trauma.
All right. Dave, I'll come and talk to you later. Thanks for your help. Yep.
Chris went down the ladder himself, which again was a massive feat for him, after being unconscious less than 20 minutes ago.
I can remember climbing down into the system, and being met by sort of a reception committee of divers.
Two diver medics came through from the chamber they were going to take him to, and stripped him off, towelled him down, wrapped him up in 3 or 4 duvets.
Despite the must be many thousands of pounds of medical equipment we have locked away in that chamber, probably the most important bit of kit they used was the tea cosy they put on my head to keep me warm.
It was an exceedingly dirty white tea cosy with flowers on it that we use all the time to keep our teapots warm, and they took it straight off a pot and put it on his head still warm, so it obviously did the trick.
There was a lot of hugging and and well dones, you know, and a lot of thanks to Dave and Duncan, and a lot of recounting the story to a lot of curious colleagues.
The next thing I won't actually forget, because when they locked on the bell, we had the diver. He got out of the bell and he looked at the camera and just waved, and that was a really good feeling for us up on the bridge.
He was monitored the rest of the night, and once we'd established that Chris was okay, and there was nothing else we could do, we left the site and I instructed the vessel to go straight to Aberdeen.
The outcome of the incident was great relief, of course. I remember going on board on the Saturday and seeing Chris Lemons for the first time, and I'm not usually in the habit of hugging our divers, but I must admit I did give him a quick grab and a squeeze there. Somebody said, well, you've been really lucky, but I disagree. I think that the guys on board made their own luck that night.
Christopher was obviously desperately trying to get a hold of me to let me know what was happening, because he had been told that the newspapers were being informed, and he had to let me know prior to them either getting the wrong end of the stick, getting the wrong story, or such a small village that we live in that someone else were to turn around and say, oh my goodness, Morag, is Christopher all right, what's happened? He began to tell me the story of this diver and how this had happened, and you know, I listened to the story sitting in my classroom on my own, and eventually we got to the end of the story and I said, Christopher, who did this happen to? And he said, it was me. And I didn't know what to do, just total shock. Total shock. It was awful. I just looked for someone to talk to. Sorry, I'm getting upset.
In truth, I came out of this whole experience in many ways more confident and happy with what I do for a living. So for us, there was never any question of not going back, and I really hope I continue to do this for many years.
When the boat had been repaired and extensively tested, It was very important to Bibby and for us to get back onto the boat, get back onto the horse, as it were, straight away. We did have a bit of a laugh and a joke about it, but we were all very serious going into the dive, and quite relieved possibly when it had all finished. We had no run-offs, there were no problems whatsoever. It was just another day, and we all came back safely.
Prior to this incident, Bibby Offshore was a participant in this business in diving in the North Sea. But as a result of this incident, we are absolutely leading diver safety nowadays. We want to make sure that we do everything that we possibly can to learn from this incident, and as a result, make sure that the risk that the divers are exposed to are as low as possible.
Life for me, well, life goes on as it does. I still have to clean the fridge out on a Tuesday and put the bins out on a Wednesday, and life continues as normal. We've finished building our house since, which has been a real pleasure. So I got to see the end of it after all.
We did make it to the wedding, and he massively embarrassed me when, at the end of his speech, he mentioned, obviously, what had happened, and pointed me out as to who it was that had revived him in the Bell. For the rest of the evening, I couldn't get away from the bar. I never bought a drink. I hardly saw my wife because everybody just wanted to come and shake me hand, pat me on the back and buy me a whiskey.
And then, yeah, we subsequently got married, I think the following April, which was, best day of my life, as it should be. So life's been extremely good since, yeah. People say very kind things about what I've done, but in truth, in this whole situation, I was simply the damsel in distress. And I've always been very conscious that whilst people want to talk to me, the truth is that they were the heroes of this story.